Will the Syrian army end up controlling all of the country's Kurdish-held areas? The army's made significant territorial gains after intense battles with the Kurdish-led Syrian Democratic Forces in recent days. So how will this play out inside Syria and the wider region? This is Inside Story. Hello again, I'm James Bays. It all started in Aleppo, and now the fighting has expanded to the northeastern parts of Syria. The army says it's made major advances there, seizing areas previously under the control of the Kurdish-led SDF. This rapid sequence of events paves the way for the government to tighten its grip on this strategic and oil-rich region. Many rounds of talks and agreements between Damascus and the SDF leadership over the last year yielded no results. This despite heavy involvement from the US in efforts to bring the two sides to common ground. The latest developments are expected to have far-reaching consequences both at home and across the region. We'll discuss that with our guests in a moment. But first, this report from Fintan Monaghan.
The Syrian military rolls into Deir Hafer, expanding its control in the north. The town had been run by the Syrian Democratic Forces, a predominantly Kurdish armed group. Now that they've been pushed out, many here are optimistic about the future.
There will be peaceful solutions. We have been living as Arabs, Kurds and Christians all together, and we will live in peace again. I tell the world just to wait 2 years for us and see how successful we will be.
But others aren't so sure. These Kurdish protesters in Aleppo accuse the government of atrocities. The army took control last week. Several people were killed in the fighting. They fear the government will not respect the rights of minorities.
If they truly love the Kurds, and if they sincerely say that the Kurds are an official and fundamental component of Syria, then the rights of the Kurdish people must be recognised in the constitution.
Fighting broke out last week when negotiations broke down on integrating the SDF into the Syrian army. Since then, the group has been pushed out of Aleppo and withdrawn east of the Euphrates. The fighting is now happening close to the city of Raqqa, which was hard won during the fight against ISIL. Kurds have controlled the north along with its oil fields for more than a decade, ever since the uprising against former ruler Bashar al-Assad. That control is now being challenged. But as Syria's President Ahmed al-Shara seeks to centralize power, he's also seeking to reassure the Kurds that their culture will be respected.
I'm honored to issue a special decree for our Kurdish people that guarantees their rights and certain aspects of their distinctiveness within the text of the law. I urge everyone who was forcibly displaced from their land to return safely and securely, without any condition or restriction other than laying down arms.
The US has called for an end to the fighting, and their envoy Tom Barak has been holding meetings with Kurdish leaders across the border in Iraq, where they have their own autonomous region. The Kurdish people are spread across several countries, and a diplomatic settlement may involve regional powers. The US is a long-time backer of the Kurds, but is trying to balance this with support for the new Syrian government. If the fighting continues, effective control may end up being decided on the battlefield. But winning over the Kurdish people, in order to secure their backing for the new Syrian state, may be the tougher battle that lies ahead. Fintan Monaghan, Al Jazeera for Inside Story.
Well, let's discuss this all further now with today's guests. And joining us from Damascus, Omar Abu Laila. He's a Syrian affairs analyst. In Wicklow, south of Dublin in Ireland, we have Scott Lucas, who is Professor of US and International Politics at University College in Dublin. And from Erbil in Iraq, Kamaran Palani. He is a Kurdish principal investigator for PeaceRep Iraq programme at the London School of Economics. Thank you, all of you, for being our experts to discuss what is a complex subject. Let me start with you, Omar, in Damascus. In recent hours, we have seen, I think, a very significant development, the change in control of a large section of territory in Syria, the biggest change in control since the fall of Assad. Would you not agree?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Actually, what happened in the past hours and what's going to happen in the next hours, this is expected from all of us as Syrians. We witnessed this and we know very well this is the end of the SDF. Very soon we will see there's no more SDF in Syria because all the international community supporting the Syrian state. And recently, SDF didn't accept and respect the March 10 agreement, which signed with President Ahmed al-Shara. So President Ahmed al-Shara gave them enough time a year ago, and they did not. I mean, they just waste time, and they were just relying on other people from outside to support them, to stand with them, to give them any other things that their own projects. The issue with the SDF recently, what happened in the countryside of Aleppo was because we saw a lot of PKK leaders. Clearly, they were leading the battles against the Syrian government. Also killed many of the Syrian defense members or fighters and civilians as well. At the same time, we saw the Syrian state how protected the civilians when they opened the humanitarian corridor. When the Syrian state controlled the Hayy al-Ashrafiyya neighborhood and Sheikh Maqsood neighborhood as well, they moved
Those are neighborhoods in Aleppo,
Hafer,
to be clear.
which is also in the countryside of Aleppo. Yes, sorry. The neighborhood in Aleppo. When after the battle or the fight in Ashrafiyya and Sheikh Maqsood in the countryside of Aleppo, the Syrian state continued to fight and defeat the SDF because they became a real threat to the country, the entire country. They tried to kill 2 ministers and the governor of Aleppo. That happened when they
let's leave it there with Omar. Let's leave it there with you for now, because I'd like to look at exactly what got us there in a moment. But just where we sit at the moment, Kamaran, fast-moving, dramatic developments. Are these dangerous developments in your view?
Thank you so much for having me. I would like to say that, with all respect, I think what we have heard from our colleague from Damascus, this reminds us of the language that was used by the previous regime. That was the language of denying communities from their own rights and framing developments from their only security point of view. So two questions are important here. And one question, Damascus, no matter who has been there over the past century, never asked it, what do Kurds want? And this is a very critical question for Kurdish people across the Middle East, even beyond Syria. What Kurds want is recognition of their rights as a collective group within existing political borders and political realities. And this question has to be asked by academics, analysis. What do the Kurds want? What Kurds want in Syria is a decentralized system, a decentralized local governance within a unified Syria.
In other words, Kamaran, pretty similar to what you have now in Iraq. Is that the model? Because you're there in Erbil. There is a unified country, but the Kurds have a part of that country and some self-control.
Exactly, but Syria is a different context. Syria is a different case. External players are different. Local dynamic is different. So there shouldn't be a one formula that can be imposed on every single context. But the principle, the philosophy is the same, which is a local autonomy. Let me govern my region within a unified within a unified state. I think this is...
Thank you for that, Kamaran. We'll come back to you in a minute. But I think just for our viewers around the world, I think we need to remind everyone, Scott, how we got here. Let's rewind. Just over a year ago, 8th of December 2024, more than 50 years of the Assad family in control in Syria. They were forced out, and Bashar al-Assad was forced out. Before that, you had nearly 14 years in war in Syria, and various groups fighting Assad, and they took control of different areas, which brings me to the central group here, the Syrian Democratic Forces. Just bring our viewers up to speed of who they are and what they have controlled in recent years.
In October 2015, when the Islamic State controlled large areas of northern and central Syria, it was in the United States' interest, and indeed some other countries, as well as the interest of the Kurds, to create the Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, this was a Kurdish-led organization, but it received quite a bit of U.S. backing in particular. And with that U.S. backing, the SDF was instrumental in effectively removing the Islamic State as an organized force. ISIS is still there in cells, but the Islamic State really didn't control any territory in Syria after the spring of 2019. But the issue here, James, is, and I'm trying to navigate in between my two colleagues, is that with the fall of the Assad regime, it did not resolve political and military lines that had developed even after the fall of ISIS in 2019. On the military front, the Kurdish groups and many Kurds had actually been pushed out of the Afrin canton, which was in northwest Syria, Aleppo being part of it in 2018. But the Syrian Democratic Forces still held positions west of the Euphrates River. And the Syrian government wanted the Syrian Democratic Forces to be east of that major waterway. And then politically, of course, as we've just heard from Kamaran, you have Kurdish authorities that had developed autonomy because of all the tensions and the conflict that was taking place between Assad and other groups. And those Kurdish authorities still are in charge of areas of northeast Syria. So that obviously raised the question, which is, can you get a federal Syria in which those Kurdish groups still have autonomy in those areas, and it is compatible with the rule of the government in Damascus?
Now, Omar, pick up the story then from where Scott has brought us. Since December last year, after the fall of Assad, Ahmad al-Shara has said his aim is to unify Syria and unify Syrians. And he's been in negotiations with the SDF to integrate, particularly militarily, to become one army. Why, in your view, did those negotiations not work?
It's not the mistake of the Syrian state. It was because the SDF and its leaders, I mentioned in the first, like the PKK leaders controlling the decision of the SDF. We have to separate between two levels of the leaders in the SDF for us as Syrians. I do believe there are some good leaders and somehow trying really to integrate in the Syrian state, and they did their best, but the issue is not with them. The issue with the PKK leaders who came from other countries and trying to make this chaos in Syria, despite President Ahmed al-Shara gave them enough time. We're talking about a year. He gave them a year just to come and get the rights that accept by all the Syrians. But they tried to take like a federal control in the northeast Syria, despite the people in the northeast Syria, including Raqqa province, Deir province, Hasaka province, don't accept and like SDF. SDF has done a lot of violation in the past years. And even if in his last speech, I'm talking about President Ahmed al-Shara, he addressed good questions to the SDF leaders that, what have you done in the past 8 years in northeast Syria when you asking me to give you other things that you are looking for? It's absolutely not acceptable. So I do believe now we are in front of another scenario. We're facing another scenario, which is the truth. And the fact, everyone believes in it, Syria will be one land, one army, and one people. This is the truth. And also, we are expecting
let me bring in Kamaran. Let me bring in. Sorry, Omar. If I can bring in Kamaran on some of those points. You heard there, Omar, talk about the SDF and how some of the fighters are actually PKK. Let me just explain. That's the Kurdistan Workers' Party. It is a political party in Turkey that had been fighting the Turkish state, although recently it said its members should put down their weapons. Is there truth in that? Because it's certainly not just Omar saying it. Turkey has been saying this all along, that the YPG, which is the Kurdish military force, a central part, maybe the big part of the SDF, is actually the PKK.
There is no question PKK has so much influence over the SDF, and that is an empirical fact. But if you go back to April 2025, there was a political gathering or meeting among the Kurdish parties, including the most rival Kurdish parties to the PKK presence. They came up with a statement or with a demand, and that was the call for a decentralized Syria, within it a local decentralization for the Kurd. So reducing the entire Kurdish issue in Syria to the PKK is unjust, but also it's the language is being imposed by Turkey over the new Syrian actors to deal with the Kurdish issue. The Kurdish issue is not the PKK issue. It's much broader than this. Every single Kurdish group, no matter their relationship with the PKK, they endorse local autonomy administration for the Syrian Kurds. I think this is the question Damascus should ask and should also answer. It's not about the PKK influence and anymore. So really, I mean, this is not the language for political settlement and political solution to the Kurdish issue. I'm trying to say what's happening in Syria. It's not the Damascus PKK fight. It's the Damascus Kurdish violent clashes, and this is important. I'm not trying to bring ethnic tensions into what's happening in Syria, but if we don't address the question about what Kurds want, I mean, this is important. The new authorities in Syria want Kurds to be treated as individual rights. You can have access to this and that. Kurds want a collective recognition. And this is central to understanding the continuation of the Kurdish issue in the Middle East. Kurds want to be recognized as a collective group, as a distinct group within the new Syria. Honestly, I'm not very hopeful that we are even in the post-Assad area. The Basis mentality, is still there.
Let me bring in Scott again, if I can. So those are some of the discussions that have been going on over the last year. In the last couple of weeks, simmering tensions turned into escalation with clashes in Aleppo. And then on Friday, there were supposed to be, I think, 2 developments which were supposed to calm things down. The SDF agreed to pull out of certain areas, a military agreement to pull back. And separately, President al-Shara said that there would be new status for Kurds, for their legal and cultural rights in Syria. That was supposed to be the start of something to calm things down. And as you know, Scott, the US have been involved in brokering all of this. Perhaps we should take the 2 bits one by one. Militarily first, the military agreement. Where did it break down? Because the SDF are saying that they were misled and that the government forces went faster and further than was agreed.
Well, it broke down because the narratives are different on the 2 sides. Clearly, from the SDF's point of view, they were thinking, well, if we withdraw east of the Euphrates River, then we've done our bit. We can hold our lines at that point. Clearly, from the position of the Syrian government forces, that was not enough. They wanted to make the advance across the Euphrates and further to the east. And it was further complicated or intersected with the fact that these are majority Arab population areas. And so you had local groups who also were coming out against the FDF for their reasons. And that has contributed, I think, to the pressure on the SDF pull further. That brings militarily, and I'll put this back to Omar and Kamaran, is I'm looking at what happens when the SDF pulls back to majority Kurdish areas or areas with largest Kurdish populations. what happens then? Do we get stable lines militarily? The second aspect, James, you're absolutely right politically, is that, there was this line from President al-Shara, well, we'll recognize Kurdish as a national language. We'll recognize Kurdish groups as national groups. But that actually raised a fundamental problem. So far, the discussions have pretty much been on the military level. So you keep hearing that Damascus is negotiating with the SDF. If you're really talking about these political arrangements around autonomy, around decentralization or a federal system, if you're talking about civil rights, if you're talking about minority rights, you need to be having these discussions between Damascus and political groups. And that's not happening. I mean, it may not be happening because people can argue, well, everything has to go through the SDF. It may not be happening because we get this argument of external influences, which is being thrown in and which muddies the waters. From an outsider's point of view, I'm not Syrian, but from an outsider's point of view, can you get these discussions on the political level where you begin to discuss the details of what autonomy would look like while parking the issue of integration into the military forces, or at least keeping a sort of stability there while we try to progress and see if everybody can live together?
OK, let me bring in Omar and to perhaps answer one of the questions you are asked there in that detailed answer. Where should the government forces stop their offensive? Because Raqqa is the next place on the road. Raqqa was the place that was the stronghold of ISIL, which raises lots and lots of questions. And then beyond that, of course, there is the Kurdish heartland, what they call Rojava. Should the government continue all the way into that territory as well?
Very good question, James. Thank you for this question to move it up. The Syrian Ministry of Defense or fighters or Syrian state will not stop before they control all the Syrian land. As I mentioned in the beginning, one land, one community, one army. So it's not just in Raqqa. We are expecting Raqqa will be liberated in a couple of hours. Deir already out of the control of the SDF since in the morning. And we are talking about a new agreement for Hasaka province. It's very clear for the international community, for the Syrians and for the Syrian state, and also for the SDF. Now only one solution. The SDF must accept it and they don't have any other options. The solution is that there is no more SDF exist in Syria. PKK leaders, they must get out of the country, which is the state, the Syrian state, very honest in this request. And I think Madloum Abdi with his team, they will be in some positions. I don't have enough information about this, but I could expect this scenario will happen. The issue with the SDF, specifically in the northeast Syria, the people don't accept them. And we're talking about many, many years. And they cannot have a Rojava region, what do you call it? Because if you take an example, the Zor province, it's 100% Arabs and tribes. Raqqa as well, 80-90%. And Hasaka, the most of the people in Hasaka as well, Arabs. In Qamishli, yes. President Ahmed al-Shara was very clear in his decree when he announced 2 days ago that we have to separate between the Kurds and between the SDF. SDF never ever talk about Kurds. They were talking about their own projects in Syria, which is not existing.
Let me bring Kamaran back in to discuss some of this. Kamaran, when we look at Raqqa, as I said before, it was the capital of ISIL. It's sensitive because there are still ISIL fighters, and there are ISIL fighters in jail, some of them in Raqqa, some of them elsewhere in the territory that the SDF controls. And if you bring in the families as well, we're talking many thousands of people. Those people could escape from jails. And add in on top of that, this is where the oil and gas in Syria is as well. So what do you think could be the significance if the government forces continue their push all the way through the SDF-controlled area?
What is really fascinating from academic as well as political point of view is that the groups that few years ago, the the Assad regime state that used violence in the name of the state against them. Now they are using the same framework to legitimize and justify violence against other minorities and actors. And that is really troubling. And this is the core of what's happening in Syria, justification of the use of violence against minorities, whether they are in Sweden or in other places. And most specifically about your question, and this is my LSE Middle East Center research project with the returnees and the ISIS families from Al-Hol and in Raqqa and other places. I don't want to reduce the entire armed groups in Syria into being ISIS or close to extremist groups. But these families, based on my fieldwork and research, as well as their members and ISIS prisoners in Raqqa and residents remaining still in Al-Hol, they would be very happy to be integrated into the new Syrian state, because this is the kind of state they are. It's familiar to them, and they have got groups that they can access and partner with them. And this is going to be a huge regional threat to beyond Syria. And we are not talking about a few hundred ISIS prisoners. We are talking about thousands of them. And we are also talking about thousands of family members belonging to these armed groups. We are talking about a significant number of population. But for me, statistics are not important. What is important is the political ideology. These families, these groups, these prisoners would be very happy and would be, I expect, to be easily integrated into the new security groups existing on the ground. And this should tell us a lot about the future direction of Syria. Coming back to my main point today, what will happen beyond Raqqa? What will happen beyond the territories that have been recaptured, captured by the new actors of Syria in the past few days? I think the ultimate objective of the Kurdish-led SDF or the Kurdish groups in Syria is to return to their areas, to the Kurdish majority areas. They know very well. Kurds know very well. I mean, across political group, spectrum, know very well that they cannot occupy the lands of others, and they recognize it. And they have never said Raqqa is Kurdish city. They have never said Aleppo is the Kurdish majority city. And so they should, and they will go back to their Kurdish core regions. And if they manage to get a local administration, that would be one of the suggestions for political settlement in the country.
Okay, thank you very much, Kamaran. Thank you, Kamaran. We have to leave it there. Thank you to our guests today, Omar Abu Laila, Scott Lucas and Kamaran Palani. Stay tuned to Al Jazeera for the latest updates from our teams around Syria, and with added analysis at our website, aljazeera.com. We always like to hear from you. Post your comments on our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. Or you can use X, where you should look for @AJ Inside Story. That's it from me, James Bays. From all the team here in Doha, stay safe. Bye-bye for now.